Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Clark. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. Oh, what a battery-operated mess we have made. Sales of new electric vehicles have dropped off, and worse, resale values. Manufacturers, however, have become the latest emperor to parade around not wearing any clothes. They just continue pumping out a product that no one really wants. This upside down sales plan may prove troubling for car makers and consumers alike. Plus, where do you bury them after it's all done? It's all about you, John Clark. Why are we in this mess?
Well, we're in the mess because we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And it's a rather fascinating show to watch because Americans are being sold a lot of things that they don't want. And it comes back to that gaslighting idea again, perhaps. They don't want open borders. They're being told they're going to have open borders. They don't want bug burgers or synthetic meat either. And they don't want high inflation. So they're just told, but this is the way it's going to be. It's becoming, as I say, surreal. Now, in the case of EVs, some of the statistics are revealing a huge failure. And we might want to remember that when we ask who killed the electric car in the 1990s, I believe it was American consumers. Range anxiety, cost, reliability, all of the same things that are killing it right now. And yet Ford and GM and other manufacturers are saying they're pressing ahead to be 100% EV anyway. The EPA has announced tailpipe emission standards that are going to require 56% of all cars to be EVs. And yet 46% of Americans in a recent poll said they will never own one. And 72% of the EVs being sold are high end. And something I found interesting in my research that I don't see noted very much is that there's an overlap here. Of those 72% of EVs that are purchased that are very expensive cars, even after all the subsidies, the people most likely to buy them are wealthy. For one thing, they can spend 60, 70, 80 grand for a Cadillac EV or a BMW EV, but also they're more likely to be able to own a home charging station because what's killing the EVs is cost, reliability, and a lack of charging stations. A quarter of the charging stations are in California. I think a big dent came this winter with the cold spell that left EVs stranded everywhere. And a lot of people would just, oh gosh, how could that ever happen? Who would ever thought it? But meanwhile, there are some other things going on here. Americans are becoming aware that these are not salvific for the environment, that lithium, hurts, child labor and tears holes open in the earth. So a lot of the touted advantages of EV cars aren't being delivered. And then you're losing out on reliability, and cost is a big thing when we look at all these other economic factors. So I don't really see how they turn it around. But what's fascinating to me is that it used to be that products were decided upon by consumers and their buying decisions, not by government and corporations and them only providing certain wares for you to choose from. This is, it seems to me, somewhat unprecedented at this scale.
But John, there's 7 or 8 public charging stations since 2021 that cost $77.5 billion.
$7.5
They've done a great job.
Go Pete Buttigieg. Well, okay. But President Biden just slapped Chinese EVs with 100% tariff. I mean, Dave, how the heck is that going to play out?
Well, my view is it's just eyewash. I mean, really, the Chinese EV market, the highest sales is with the company Polestar, and that had an estimated sales of 2% of the total EV market, and it'd be even generous to reflect on that to be about 24,000 EVs in 2023. So whatever the appeal of a Chinese EV might have, a stiff tariff is doubling the price of it is probably going to have a chilling effect on the sales, and it more than likely will put them in a less than competitive position for, as though they weren't already, for anything that would be comparable to U.S. sales. And, will it have a perceptible impact on total sales in the U.S.? Absolutely not. I mean, it just won't. I think that this whole idea of EVs is still just a novelty purchase. And one of the most symbolic photos of the issues that depict the circumstances that we're in is the row of EVs hooked up to their charging stations being powered by a diesel generator. And
Right.
that says everything.
Well, what's funny about that, what Dave is mentioning though, is that, okay, one, I don't know if you've seen Chinese EVs, and they're actually quite appealing. But the other part of this conversation is that China can circumvent those tariffs by going into Mexico and building their cars there. So this whole tariff thing, it's astounding to me. And if I may address that whole tariff thing, I find it's frustrating just because of how hypocritical it is. So the White House's defense for slapping all these tariffs on China's EVs and all of its green-oriented technology is because the Chinese government is subsidizing these companies. But guess what? The whole Bidenomics thing, the whole point of it is to give generous corporate subsidies to all these companies, foreign and domestic. So if I'm a Chinese company, I could partner with some American company and get those tax credits there. So the U.S. is subsidizing its car industry and its overall green energy, just like Beijing is. So I find it when Janet Yellen was talking about that to be extremely hypocritical. And you can find a deeper read into that on libertynation.com.
Thank you.
I think too, Andrew, the fact that from the fourth quarter of 23 to the first quarter of 2024, EV sales across the board fell by 15.2%, and that's a trend that, even though General Motors is real excited about keeping their manufacturing going, that's a trend that the stockholders aren't going to put up with long.
But also,
Okay,
if I may just say one more thing on this, is that the taxpayers are subsidizing failure, because when you factor in federal and state subsidies and all the regulatory credits for EVs, the last estimate I saw was $22 billion a couple of years ago. This equates to about $50,000 per EV that taxpayers have subsidized. So the government is once again socializing the cost of EVs, forcing taxpayers, utility ratepayers, and gas-powered car drivers to cover the cost of this entire boondoggle. And I'm guessing they're betting on the lack of demand to bring down the cost, because the market is now flooding with the EVs that nobody wants. You saw Hertz recently; they're selling off their entire inventory, and you see the price of used Tesla, just collapsing. So I guess maybe that's where they're going to say, "Oh, look, you can now afford a Tesla because the prices have collapsed because nobody wants it." A case of demand destruction. That's the economic lesson of the day.
wow. Thanks again for another economic lesson in this segment. Graham, I don't know if you were around in the United States when Lee Iacocca basically got bailed out by the government. Chrysler got bailed out by the government. Are we looking at the potential to have another, government interference to try to save this EV stuff?
Yeah, and I would say that process has probably already begun. Actually, it might not be as dramatic as a sudden bailout, but then again, it might actually come to that, because because this goes beyond. I mean, obviously, the economic implications of the electric vehicle market are huge, but of course, there are the philosophical stakes are very high, and by that I mean the political stakes, if you like, are very high, because the entire left has gambled everything on pushing anthropomorphic or man-made climate change, and they obviously have a ulterior motive for that, and it's all about control of everything, essentially, starting with the economy, but they've bet so much on it that they're never going to allow, as for all the problems and the dips in sales and all this kind of stuff, and the horrendous stories about people getting stranded in their EVs or the catching fire and all this horrible stuff. They are never going to, the electric vehicle market is already kind of too big to fail in the minds of the far left and the progressive left. They've staked everything on this man-made climate change thing. And they've convinced everybody that switching to electric vehicles is going to reduce carbon emissions to the point where we're going to be able to save the planet. And of course, that is also nonsense. The Biden administration or any other Democratic administration, quite frankly, at any time within the next 25 to 30 years will, if necessary, slash the budgets of every other government department, raise taxes as well, and do whatever they can to acquire enough dollars to throw into the electric vehicle market to keep it afloat, no matter how bad things get. They will sacrifice everything else for this industry, the EV industry.
Just one quick correction, Graham. The mantra is buy every electric vehicle except a Tesla. That's the new mantra from.
Well, yes, that is true. Yeah.
Everything but. Well, I can tell you this: I'm not buying. I will never invest in an EV, and I might be old and not flexible, but no way, not where I live. We don't drive things like that around here. We have trucks and four-wheel drive, and we drive through fields and farms. And
I'd like to throw in one more point as well, and that is that even though I'm never going to buy the global warming, climate change nonsense that we keep hearing, other than that, I do actually consider myself an environmentalist. In my own life, I do certain things to divest myself of paper goods, plastic goods. I'm very much about sustainability, and I'm very much about protecting the environment. And you can tell me all you want that you see the only environmental benefit apparently we get from driving EVs is reduced carbon emissions. But then when you excuse the pun, when you offset that against what John alluded to earlier on is the huge scars in the earth from lithium mines and cobalt mines and the child labor that's used to extract those materials to make just to even keep the number of EVs we've got now on the road. What happens when we get to this magical point down the road where 60%, 75%, 80% of all the vehicles on the road are EVs? Imagine the untold damage we're going to do to this earth by just trying to manufacture enough of these batteries to keep these electric vehicles going. I mean, we would have been better off just to put up with the carbon emissions.
If there's a silver lining in all of this, Sarah, it's the fact that the momentum may have shifted a bit here in that you now have the EU, which has shown itself to be fed up with all of this foolishness. They've gone conservative in much of their leadership now in the last week. And I think that it's a trend that you might see in terms of walking away from the globalist notion that they know best and we know least, and we're going to eat the EVs whether we like them or not.
Well, perhaps the fad for EVs is coming to an end. But, hey, flying cars are right around the corner. That should be fun. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today. For free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.